Remember those old traffic control games where you'd have to drag ships or airplanes around and try not to crash? My favorite was Harbour Master, but other people like Flight Control, or the more recent clone, Planes Control. These games were amazingly fun, while also being very simple to play. Anyone could pick them up for a few minutes of enjoyment, while at the same time, their skill ceiling was quite high. Sadly, a lot of these games are now gone. In particular, my personal favorite, Harbour Master. Well, I spent the last couple of years working on my own traffic control game with my own unique flavor. Hi, my name is Jeremy, and I'm working on a game called Merchants of the Stars. I recently released a demo on Steam, Android, and iOS. I hope you'll try it out using the links in the description below, and wishlist it on Steam if it interests you. There aren't many games that use the tap and drag traffic control design, and as far as I know, no desktop games. So I felt the idea was underexplored, and set out to change that. In this video, I'll show you how I spent the last 2 years creating my traffic control game, Merchants of the Stars. The core mechanic in games like Harbour Master is dragging ships to draw paths that they follow. The ships need to reach their assigned docks and avoid crashes. Once they're done unloading, you tap and drag them again to make them leave the map. If they collide, you lose. I'd been looking for a game project, one with a scope that would allow me to actually complete it, and it felt like the core tap and drag mechanics would be doable with my experience. In July of 2023, I started working on the game, using the Unity game engine. I made some early progress implementing the basic mechanics. But in September of 2023, the Unity price change fiasco began. To avoid the mess, I decided to switch development to the Godot game engine instead. Starting again from scratch, I began with the most basic part of the game, the click and drag. I grabbed some nice top-down spaceship game art and made it so the ship would follow a line drawn by the player. I then added cargo to the ship. Initially, I decided to go with 2 types of cargo, red and blue. For visual clarity, I made these simple red and blue squares, and this design more or less stuck even to now. To make the ship look more lively, I slapped a particle emitter on the ship's engine. A little early for polish perhaps, but the extra visual juice made me happy. The next important element was the dock. I thought it would be natural to dock at a space station, so I found some top-down space structure art and constructed a space station with some docks. To add a little challenge, each dock would only accept one type of cargo, either red or blue, so I added an indicator to show the color. Now I had ships and docks, but I had to make them work together. This interaction was more complex than I expected, but ended up feeling good almost immediately. For fun, I decided to make the space station slowly rotate. Since the rotation is slow, the station's position is predictable, but this change made it require a little bit of extra planning to make sure the ship goes to the right place, which I found to be a fun twist. On top of that, the rotation made the whole world of the game feel much more alive. Now I had interacting ships and docks, but to make a playable game loop, I needed to spawn in ships at regular intervals. I added an indicator to show where a new ship will spawn in, to avoid nasty surprises. Then, I made it so ships bounce at the edge of the screen if they still have cargo to deliver. Once they're empty, they're allowed to leave. With these changes, the game was finally playable, though there was still a long way to go. Despite the ships and space station, the game still didn't look like space, so I slapped on a nice space background. With that, the theming felt good, but there was still a distinct lack of danger in the game. So I made ships explode when they collide. I found the explosion very satisfying, and was feeling pretty good with the gameplay so far. But an obvious missing piece was a UI or menu. I added a basic implementation. At this point, the game looked and felt decent, but was missing a lot of atmosphere. I dabble in music creation, so I spent some time to write 3 atmospheric music tracks. You can listen to the music I created on my SoundCloud if you want. I think they turned out quite well, and you're listening to one of them in the background right now. Speaking of sound, I thought it would be cool for the pilots of the ship to talk to you when you interact with them, similar to a game like StarCraft.
New destination?
So I wrote a bunch of dialogue for the pilots to speak when you interact with them. I added some radio static.
New destination?
And overall, I think the effect is quite good.
Need something?
Orders, sir.
Initially, I prototyped the voice lines in ElevenLabs, but I knew I didn't want any AI assets in the final game, so don't worry. I replaced all of these with actual voice actors in the released version. For me, these voice lines invoke a lot of nostalgia for old RTS games like StarCraft.
In the 5, 5 by 5.
With most of the basics in place, I realized it was time to create a coherent game that I could release for early feedback. Despite the fact that ships could deliver cargo, spawn and despawn, and collide, there still wasn't really a game. Not only did the game never end, but there was no form of score or progression. I wanted to avoid getting bogged down in complex systems, so I went with the simplest approach I could think of. Basically, I made it so cargo deliveries would earn score, and the game would end when a single ship got destroyed. I decided to call the score profit. I've heard that using extra zeros in game scores is a good psychological trick to make players feel better about their progress, so I made the game give you $1,000 for each delivery. I also had this vague idea to make the world of the game a kind of hyper-capitalist dystopia, and making the main score metric profit seems to fit well with this. But score was not enough. I also needed a goal. Interestingly, Harbor Master levels don't really have a goal other than maximum score, and games only end with a loss. But personally, I prefer games that present a specific challenge and actually end at some point, so I decided to take a different direction. The most obvious goal is to reach some profit target, so I made each level have a profit goal. For example, if the goal is $10,000, then you need to make 10 cargo deliveries to win. Once you do, the game pauses and allows you to proceed to the next level, but you also have the option to keep going and achieve a high score in the current level. I'm not sure if I'll keep this system, but I feel like it strikes a good balance for now. It allows the player to win and progress through the game, but also allows endless play with a high score. With the level lifecycle out of the way, I next needed to think about the game lifecycle, or the way that you progress from level to level. Once again, I decided to start with the most straightforward system possible. Once you beat level 1, you advance to level 2, and so on. Innovative, right? I added a next button to the end game screen that is shown when you win, and automatically advances you to the next level. To navigate these new levels, I added a level selection menu. After a few tries, I settled on this version that shows a panel for each level including its title, high score, goal score, and a preview picture. You can navigate through the levels using the arrows on the left and right. With the basic level and game flow done, I started thinking about how to make the levels more fun. So far, they had extremely basic logic. Basically, every 5 to 15 seconds, I would spawn a new ship at a random point along the edge of the screen. With this system, the difficulty quickly ramped up from very easy to very hard, especially if you were a bit slow at dealing with cargo. I decided on a basic fix for this, which was to slowly increase the difficulty over time. I stuck with randomly spawning ships every 5 to 15 seconds, but also added a max number of ships allowed on the screen at once. This max starts at 3, but increases by 1 every 30 seconds. This makes the difficulty increase a little bit slower, making it easier at the beginning. But it also causes the game to become increasingly difficult as you play, making it less boring to play for a long time. Eventually, I realized that increasing based on time was not great. If you were a little slow, you'd soon be overwhelmed by ships, and if you were too fast, the game wouldn't keep up with you. It made far more sense to base progression on how much profit you'd earned. So I changed it so that the maximum number of ships would increase based on the amount of profit earned. Next, I felt like I needed to make the game a little more varied and interesting. One obvious idea for the space theme was to add asteroids. I found some asteroid art online. It kind of looks like poop. I added the asteroids and made it so ships explode if they collide with them. While adding the asteroids was in itself pretty easy, I did encounter a couple of game design problems that needed fixing. First, there was now a lot more danger for ships, and it was hard, visually, to keep track of everything going on. So I added a red circle to each ship that shows up if it's too close to another ship or asteroid. Second, by playtesting with asteroids, I discovered an annoying issue. If an asteroid wanders into the path of an undocking ship, there's nothing the player can do to avoid hitting it. My initial thought was to alter how asteroids spawn, so that they only take paths that don't go too near the station. But this seemed kind of difficult, not very flexible for other levels, and overall would make asteroids less interesting, since they'd be stuck on the outside of the map. So I made a decision. Instead of taking the simplest path, I would make an entirely new system to deal with this seemingly tiny design problem. I added a station defense laser. I grabbed some free laser cannon art and then spent a day or two implementing the whole system. To match the ship controls, I wanted the laser cannon to use tap and drag mechanics, so I decided that to control it, you would have to tap the station and then drag to the asteroid you wanted to shoot. I decided to give the defense laser a fairly short range, so it could only destroy asteroids that were close enough to cause problems for undocking ships. This would ensure that you would still have to actively avoid asteroids at the edges of the screen, rather than just blasting them. I think it works pretty well. It not only solves the design issue, but it's satisfying in its own right. For testing, I made an asteroid turkey shoot level that omits ships completely and just spawns a ton of asteroids to destroy. And it's actually pretty fun. Overall, the station defense laser adds an extra thing to manage, and in a game all about frantically managing a bunch of things at once, I think it fits in well. With asteroids and the station laser done, I turned back to some important matters needed for release. I figured out how to build the game for iOS and Android, and got initial beta versions up on the Play and App stores for my testers to try. It turns out that building iOS and Android versions was very easy with Godot, so that was a win. Next, I put up a basic Steam page. The common wisdom seems to be that you should do this as early as possible. So even though I still had placeholder art and relatively limited gameplay, I thought I should go ahead and create one. By the way, please drop a wishlist. Links in the description. My goal became participating in Steam's June Next Fest, which would be an opportunity to get a lot of free exposure, and could be a natural deadline for releasing a high-quality demo and trailer. Even though it was still a few months away, I knew that June would come fast, so I would need to focus my energy on releasing a demo of the game as soon as possible. This meant pausing work on my other side projects, like my Pokemon Go YouTube channel, The Excellent Pokédex. The most pressing matter was a lack of content. While the one level I had so far was fun, I felt that having a few more gameplay elements and several distinct feeling levels would really hook players. Having around 3 varied and fun levels seems like a good target for a demo. In addition to more content, I would also need to add a tutorial. While the game is not very complicated, it also isn't self-explanatory. It isn't in a standard genre, so the click and drag mechanic definitely requires some explanation. For the tutorial, I had to make a system for displaying instructions. What I ended up with was a system of dialog boxes that could appear in 3 different places on the screen. When I need to tell the player to take some action, I pause the game and pop up a dialog box somewhere on the screen that doesn't cover anything important. Once the player has read the message, they click Dismiss to return to the game, and then do the required action. Along with the explanation, I also wanted to visually illustrate the thing the player was supposed to do. I did this by reusing the cursor graphic, repeatedly animating it to show the click and drag the player was supposed to perform. This illustration is displayed while the message is being shown, so that the text and animation together hopefully make it clear what the player is supposed to do. With all of this in place, I was able to create a simple tutorial. First, a ship appears, and instructions are given to the player on how to deliver cargo. Once the ship delivers its cargo, the player is instructed on how to make it leave the playing area. Once that's done, an asteroid appears, and the player is told how to destroy it. Finally, another ship appears and delivers a final piece of cargo to complete the tutorial. Overall, I'm pretty happy with how the tutorial turned out, and while it's quite basic, it does a good job of explaining the very simple mechanics of the game. With the tutorial done, it was finally time to add some new content. New content in this game is a bit tricky. The central concept of the game is that the only mechanic is clicking and dragging. I like the simplicity of this, but it also ensures that the game works on both desktop and mobile platforms. But the simplicity cuts both ways. Any new gameplay elements need to fit into this limited model, and it requires a bit of creativity to design interesting things with only a single control. The first thing I decided to implement was the simplest and most obvious, a bigger ship. This big ship is able to carry up to 4 cargo instead of just 2, and moves a little bit slower. It's not particularly exciting, but it adds a little bit of welcome variety to the game. Next, I decided to create an asteroid hauler. While before, the only method for dealing with asteroids was the station laser, I thought it would be interesting to have a ship type that could collect asteroids and return them to the station in exchange for money. Asteroid haulers work a little differently than ordinary ships. They are spawned without cargo, but when they fly near enough to an asteroid, a tractor beam automatically collects the asteroid. Then, they can return that asteroid to any dock. After playing around with this concept for a while, I found it pretty fun. It enabled a level design that I thought might be interesting. The idea would be that a planet is cut off from a station by an asteroid belt. You are given an asteroid hauler and need to clear a path through the asteroid belt to allow cargo deliveries from the planet to reach the station. With some balance tweaks, I think the idea ended up working well. After completing the asteroid hauler, I next decided to add pirates, another hazard type that would be a bit more active than asteroids. My plan was to give them some simple AI that would be predictable, but also make them feel like an actual enemy, rather than just an obstacle. I decided to implement the pirate as a small ship with 2 simple behaviors. If one of your ships gets close, the pirate will turn to pursue. Then, If your ship gets very close, the pirate will shoot it with a laser. It will explode, and you'll lose. As with asteroids, pirates can be destroyed by the station's laser. While the pirates are incredibly dumb, they feel like a menacing and active threat. The simple AI also allows for some tactics, like cutting pirates into range of the station laser, or redirecting them to fly out of the play area. To showcase pirates, I designed a level where the station is inside of a nebula, accessible from only one side. Pirates patrol the entrance to the nebula, while your ships spawn to the right. You need to cross the pirate patrol to make cargo deliveries and then escape back to deep space. On top of the normal management of the game, you have to constantly develop new strategies for entering and exiting the nebula safely, depending on the specific locations of the pirates. Plus, when a pirate follows you too close to the station, you can use the station's laser to destroy it, which is quite satisfying. With pirates, asteroid haulers, and these two new levels, I felt like I had enough content for a reasonable demo, so I turned my attention mostly towards polish. Most importantly, I wanted to revamp the art style of the game. I had used a bunch of random assets so far, and while I didn't think they looked too bad, they weren't cohesive, and honestly, just looked extremely generic to me. Now, I'm not much of an artist, but I was inspired by games like Mini Motorways that had very minimalist graphics. I started to develop a colorful, simple vector art style, where elements of the game were mostly composed of basic shapes. For example, the ship I designed was a simple rectangle plus semicircle, a design I soon realized had an uncanny resemblance to a popsicle. Or a toe. Nonetheless, while I might be biased, and the design was simple, I liked the new ship, and I thought it made a distinctive and colorful mascot for the game, kind of perfect on an icon. I found myself thinking of the new art style as Buzz Lightyear wallpaper, like something you'd find on a child's bedroom wall. I decided to make the background less explicitly spacey, and instead made it blue and covered in grid lines, so it would look more like a traffic control display. To sell this traffic control display effect, I also added some CRT distortion and a TV turning on effect when a level is started. I built the station out of many simple shapes, and to make it look a little less flat, I added a simple depth effect to each of its pieces using a shader. This effect was inspired by Mini Motorway's simple building depth effect. I made the nebula far more attractive by using a shader to make a wibbly purple cloud effect. I designed a planet for the planet level, using a shader to make dynamic looking water. I also added a black hole to the main menu, and created an area of distorted space behind it. Not the most physically accurate, but it looked cool. I plan to use it in a level at some point, but haven't quite figured out how to do so yet. With art mostly out of the way, I spent an enormous amount of time polishing the menu in various ways, ensuring all the expected sound and graphics settings were available, adding keyboard navigation, and so on. It was finally time to get rid of the AI voices, so I hired a bunch of voice actors on Fiverr. I ended up paying one voice actor for the story narration pieces.
The board emphasizes that the only ones doing any extortion should be us.
And 4 other voice actors for the lines spoken by the ship pilots.
New destination? What's next?
New heading?
I also decided to get a real artist to make Steam capsule art for me, and after a bunch of back and forth, we ended up with a pretty nice looking capsule for the game. Outside of the new art, I wanted to make the gameplay itself a lot juicier, so I added a bunch of additional sounds for various things. I also added a little animation when you drop off cargo that makes it far more satisfying. Finally, I added a screen shake when things explode, which feels great. I also found that the game was a strange mixture of stressful and relaxing. I often found myself mindlessly playing and getting annoyed at failure, so I decided to add a Zen mode for those players who would prefer to just deliver cargo without pressure. With that, I started working furiously on bug fixing in time for NextFest, and improving and fixing every little thing I could think of. In early April, about a month before NextFest, I released a demo. I announced it to my meager list of wishlisters, but didn't see too many downloads just yet. I hoped NextFest would be better. While waiting for NextFest to start, I also released the game to mobile, taking some time to implement ad mobs to show occasional ads, as well as an in-app purchase to disable these ads. I also added some anonymous analytics, because in my experience without them, it's very hard to tell whether people are even playing a game, let alone what their specific pain points turn out to be. All this time, I continued to add random polish, like these text effects, or this progress bar that is shown while cargo is unloaded. Finally, NextFest arrived. Before NextFest, About 60 unique players had tried the game. By the end, over 100 more had tried, and the number is now up to around 200. I ended up gaining about 100 wishlists, which is not quite what I hoped for, but is not that bad considering I went in with only 232. I have since learned that NextFest works much better if you go in already having a large number of wishlists.
I thoroughly enjoyed this. Good game.
I think this game is great, and I'm 100% wishlisting it.
With NextFest over, the goal is now two things. The first is obviously to release a full version of the game. For that, I'll require a significant amount of new content and some new mechanics. But the second is to do much more marketing than I have in the past. It's always been a bit of an afterthought, but making sure to take the time to put the game in front of people will be super important for its eventual launch. I also need to balance the needs of the Steam and mobile releases. The game works well on both platforms, but it may turn out that it simply becomes more popular in one or the other. It remains to be seen. I'm aiming for a full release later this year, and will continue to post devlogs to the channel, so please subscribe. It would mean the world to me if you try Merchants of the Stars on Steam or mobile. You can find all the links at taugames.ca/MOTS or in the description below. Dropping a wishlist on Steam will help me a bunch. Bye!